The GM looks down at the paper and up at the ranger. His expression was interesting, as if unsure whether to be horrified or ecstatic. Roll it. Hey, what's up everybody, I'm SkyDieRay and welcome to another D&D Greentext story. Today we're gonna read the story of the Storm Quiver. I don't know if the story has a name or something, I think it's... people know it by the Storm Quiver story, I think. Anyway, enjoy, I think it's a great story, so yeah, enjoy. Isn't the Bottomless Quiver fairly standard early equipment for most archers? I encountered an interesting variant of the Bottomless Quiver in one game, which officially had no name, but we called it the Storm Quiver because of how the enchantment worked. Essentially, you could put as many arrows into the quiver as you liked, but could only take one out. When you shot that arrow, it split and multiplied into all the arrows that had been previously stored. So, say you put 10 arrows in the quiver, you pull out one, notch it and loose, and your target suddenly gets 10 shafts in the chest, but the quiver is now empty. Because it was quite a one-shot thing, it could strip the archer of all ammo in a single burst if used recklessly. The ranger ended up using it as his secondary quiver before splashing back to TWF when archery became less optimal. Over time, I thought he had forgotten about the Storm Quiver. Cut to a year ahead. The main set piece of the campaign is preparing for, and surviving, a massive siege by a conquering orc horde coming down from the north. While the fighter trains the locals to form an effective militia and the casters are out buffing everything they can, the rogue and ranger go out scouting, to set traps and try to establish exactly how long we have before said horde hits. Sure enough, they come across the vanguard, and after projecting their expected route, the rogue sets about making the next few miles of road the most unwelcoming possible. The ranger just finds a nice hilltop where he can see most of the horde, and pulls out the bow that we thought he'd never use again. It turns out that over the last year of weekly game sessions, he'd been hoarding every arrow we came across, from the quivers of defeated bandits and the corpses of the slain. He was even buying them fairly regularly, but never really using them since the casters had long since rendered his range damage irrelevant, forcing him to go melee. And at every opportunity, he'd put them in the Storm Quiver. He handed the GM multiple sheets of paper for every time he'd added something to the quiver, complete with the arrow types, the number of arrows, and even when and where he'd gotten them, so the GM couldn't call bull. I can't remember exactly how many he had, but it was a big number. The rule had been that you could use the Storm Quiver as a kind of AoE effect if you had a decent number of arrows. That rule had been intended for small skirmishes, hitting two guys standing fairly close to each other, but had the proviso that the more arrows you had, the wider an area you could hit in a cone. The reflex save was pretty high and homebrewed to be based on ranger levels, since it was something put out for the ranger. He stood on top of a hill overlooking the rampant horde, pulled out a single arrow, aimed roughly for the center of the army, and loosed. He used his AoE effect to target the entire horde. The GM looks down at the paper and up at the ranger. His expression was interesting, as if unsure whether to be horrified or ecstatic. Roll it. Prior to going melee, the ranger had spec'd as an archer specialist, meaning he still had quite a few feats towards being better at pew-pew archery, including ones to up his criticals. The entire group held its breath as he rolled. And then, when he confirmed the crit, we let out that breath in a joyous outpouring. The GM is quiet for a very long time before taking a big wad of paper, which had essentially been his plan for the siege next session, and throwing it in the trash. Then he began the description. For a moment, the sun is eclipsed in the valley as a single arrow becomes 2, then 4, then 8, and so on. Soon, so many arrows fall upon the orc horde that it makes less sense to think of them as thousands of individuals and more of a single cohesive mass. More died from being crushed and pierced, and the river flowed red that day. It wasn't a total wipeout. We still had to deal with some pretty large-scale orc attacks against the city next session, but in a single moment, the ranger personally ended over 50% of the orc horde, routing perhaps another 20. And of course, the ones that survived were the tough bastards rather than the mooks, so it was a tough fight the next day either way. The GM ruled that the Storm Quiver would never work again. Its enchantment burned out forever by the sheer magnitude of the cockdickery that had been wrought. Alright, that was it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video and the story. Leave a like if you did and subscribe for more. A big thank you to all the Patreon supporters that you can see on screen right now. If you want to become a Patreon yourself and support the channel, there's a link below for that. And there's also links below to all the social media, the Discord server and whatnot. So yeah, check that out. And yeah, thanks again for watching and I'll see you next time. Have a great day, bye.